Thank you, Tito June, for our session tonight. For those who still do not know our speaker, again, to tackle the final part for this session, for this series. He is a graduate of Grace Ministerial Academy, and he's now a pastor in Cubao Reformed Baptist Church, and also works as a faculty member in Grace Ministerial Academy. In addition to that, he also maintains a personal blog and creates content for Inescuela, an educational YouTube channel. With the topic Virtually Living, Christians and the Digital Age, here is Pastor Joseph Mangahas.
Okay, good evening to those who are listening via Zoom and those who are tuned in to our Facebook live streaming. So we are concluding this two-part series, which I entitled as Virtually Living Christians in the Digital Age. The title is actually, as I've said, a play on meaning, which represents the crisis that has been brought about by the digital age, and that is through this digital age and the media technology that it offers. We have been inhabiting a kind of virtual world, and it carries many good things for our convenience. However, there is also a tendency for those who inhabit such a world to kind of dwell in there in a prolonged manner that makes their life actually a virtual life, in the sense of a life that is lived almost but not completely. So that is the play on meaning that the virtually living represents. And Our topic is about the media technology that we have in this digital age. And let us just look back at some of the things, some of the major points that I discussed last Tuesday. And One of the main points that I emphasized in my lecture last Tuesday is that media technology are actually never neutral things that we casually use and ignore it with little to no effects on ourselves. Sometimes we conceptualize it that way, as if media technology are just tools that do not affect us when we use them, but that is not the truth of the matter. As one of the thinkers on relating media ecology said, Marshall McLuhan, first we build the tools, then they build us. So we may be the creator of tools, and we think that we sovereignly impose on the tools the usage that we want from it. But the truth is, when we build the tool, it actually recreates us. Those tools actually alter us on some fundamental levels of our humanity, and that is why one of the crucial principle that we need to embrace as we decide on matters of whether to use particular media technology is the principle of trade-off. So we must remember the trade-off principle, and I've stated it this way: that an intelligent and purposeful use of technology, especially media technology, considers what is gained and what is lost in adopting a certain tool. So we need to think about the trade-off, what we are gaining. And as we gain something, most likely a convenience from using a certain tool, we must also reflect on what we may be giving up in order to make a more intelligent decision, whether to abstain, to moderate, or to completely embrace a particular technology. And my proposition, as the title is Christians in the Digital Age. So the bent of our reflection is on Christian matters And my proposition was that there are actually human assets that are indispensable, that are necessary for vibrant spiritual life, that we are actually either gradually losing or weakening as we become more immersed with the media technology of our day. And that includes the social media that we use, that includes the informational media that we use. Uh, so that doubles the challenge to Christians to really think about these matters on how we could discipline ourselves with regards to the use of this media technology. And the first that we considered, what we considered last Tuesday, is the effects on our capacity for concentration. I have made the point that the generation of our capacity for sustained thinking is one of the effects of this uh, immersion in this new media technology of the digital age. And it is crucial for us because as Christians, sustained thinking is actually a necessity in many of our spiritual disciplines that we engage in order to maintain a vibrant spiritual life. So that is what we considered last Tuesday. For this lecture, I will add two more of the effects of the digital age to Christians, to people in general, but we are looking at it at a more on a more Christian reflection. So the second that we are going to consider is the effects of this technology on our capacity for solitude. So what do we mean? We mean by capacity for solitude. Well, the ability to be alone with ourselves for a certain period of time without immediately itching for social interactions and external stimulation. So that is what we mean when we say capacity for solitude. It is our ability to be alone without being lonely, to be alone without being bored for some sustained amount of time. To reflect on this, well, just take an experiment. Try to remember, when was the last time you were just sitting still and pondering for some sustained period of time without fidgeting for your phone or other external stimuli. So yung nakaupo ka lang at hindi ka nangangati na hawakan yung iyong phone or anything like that. So when was the last time that you did that? Well, for most people, I think, if they are going to be honest, it is actually a struggle to think of those moments where we were just sitting still, reflecting, contemplating, without this distraction, without the cravings for external stimuli that is brought about by our devices like phone, tablets, television, and it is an unfortunate thing. Why? Because such moments of solitude should actually be a regular part of our normal routine, especially in relation to our maintenance of our spiritual, mental, and emotional stability. That is why we need to think on this capacity um, and the costs that the our use of social media may be taking on that capacity for solitude, because this capacity is valuable, as I have said, for maintaining the health and balance of our spiritual, mental, and emotional life. In fact, this has been the practice of many people in the past. Uh, uh, the one of the founding fathers of the United States said this: "I have read abundance of fine things on solitude, I acknowledge solitude an agreeable refreshment for the busy mind. So our mind needs moments of solitude in order to rest from the busyness, from the crowd, from the noise. And this is something that is becoming harder and harder to get in our very distracted and noisy culture that has been brought about to us by the digital age. As Cal Newport has said in his book, Digital Minimalism, when you avoid solitude, you miss out on the positive things it brings you: the ability to clarify hard problems, to regulate emotions, to build moral courage, and to strengthen relationships. If you suffer from chronic solitude deprivation, therefore the quality of your life degrades. So Newport is very optimistic at what solitude, moments of healthy solitude, can bring to a person. It can help us reflect on hard problems so that we may generate good solutions to it. It can help us to really build moral courage so that we can face crowds and not compromise because we have reflected on our moral standing. It helps us to strengthen relationships. There are many benefits that can be gained from uh, availing such moments of solitude. But so if we are deprived, therefore, as he said, the quality of our lives would degrade. Now, this is the problem because the media technology of our digital age possesses many features that actually endure this capacity for solitude. And in fact, some experts with their studies are already beginning to find links between the rapid increase of mental illness in our day, mental illnesses like depression and anxiety disorders among young people. And they found that most of this, if not all, can be linked to the digital phenomenon, the increase uh, of the digital devices such as iPhone. This was studied, for example, by Jean Twenge. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing her name right, who was a psychologist and an expert on generational differences in American youth. And she published an article on the Atlantic with the title "Have Smartphones Destroyed a Generation?" So that is a very striking question. Do these small devices that we can fit inside our palm are these responsible for destroying a whole generation? And this is what she said in that article. Rates of teen depression and suicide have skyrocketed since 2011. It's not an exaggeration to describe iGen as being on the brink of the worst mental health crisis in decades. iGen is the iPhone generation. Much of this deterioration can be traced to their phones. So there are actually data that speaks of this phenomenon, that the digital age is actually responsible in the skyrocketing of the mental health issues among the young people. Well, what are the features of the digital age, of the media technology, of the digital age uh, that we may say could be responsible to that deprivation of solitude among people today? Well, the first of that is hyper connectedness. These are the obstacles to solitude that actually uh, make our lives lose a certain uh, degree of quality. And the first, as I've said, is hyper connectedness. Well, connectedness is a technology aided connectedness is a rightly celebrated achievements of human inventiveness. Just think about our fellow men in the southern areas today, the southern part of the Philippines, who have suffered the recent typhoon Odette, and one of the help that is afforded by this connectedness brought about by this media technology is that we can check on our loved ones with more convenience. Imagine these things were happening in the past when there was no phones yet, no internet. You would have to wait for days before knowing for certain that your loved ones from abroad are actually safe after such calamities. So we celebrate the technology aided connectedness that has been the products of human inventiveness, but the peril that we must be vigilant about is letting connectivity intrude on all hours of our lives, so that as this hyper connectivity intrude our lives, all of it, we have eliminated calm and serene moments of solitude. And we must understand that most social media apps in facts hijack, they exploit our natural need for human connection. We have a natural need for human interaction because we are social beings, as the Bible clearly demonstrates, reveals about the human nature. We are social beings. We we want connect connections. We want interaction with other human beings. But this very thing is what these social apps are exploiting in order to cultivate in us an addiction to this instant, effortless, and shallow interactions with other people. Well, for one, these social media apps provide for us easy venue to be heard. You just post something, and hundreds, if not thousands, of people are going to read about what you have said, and people want to be heard. There is something in us that wants to be heard, that wants to be listened to be understood. And then, the Facebook has this, for example, reacts, like likes and hearts, and this serial reception of Facebook reacts, such as the like button, instantly gratify our need for social approval. And we have that desire for social approval if we are sane, because we are social beings, as I have said. There is also the constant flow of updates about our friends' lives that makes us feel that we're not missing out on other people. And having people being accessible is also a convenient utility both in businesses and in relationships. So this legitimate needs are being fulfilled in a shallow way, in an instant way, by social media apps. So it creates an addiction in us. So precisely because the media made it much easier to satisfy legitimate social needs, that they actually fostered an addiction that impede on our capacity for solitude. So the first is hyperconnectedness, another is high content accessibility. We are always exposed to a world of contents that is easily accessible, in fact, just by a few clicks of our thumbs. So there is this stimulating worlds of connection, information, entertainment that makes solitude much more unappealing to us? How can solitude compete to this to this virtual world where almost anything you want to see can become available to you just by the click of your thumb? And that makes solitude something that we do not want for most of the time. As Newport said in his book, the smartphone provided a new technique to banish the remaining slivers of solitude, the quick glance. So that is what we have now. We can quickly glance on our phones or on our gadgets in order to to access content or to be connected to the outside world, to the virtual world, that it intrudes on all of our moments of solitude. At the slightest hint of boredom, he continues, you can now surreptitiously glance at any number of apps or mobile adapted websites that have been optimized to provide you an immediate and satisfying dose of input from other minds. It's now possible to completely banish solitude from your life. And that is what we have done with our lives as we had these phones and gadgets intrude on our lives. And to take a more Christian reflection, Donald Whitney, in his influential book on spiritual disciplines, he said, unlike previous generations, technology now makes it possible for us to enjoy the benefits of news, music, educational content, and more whenever we want and wherever we are. But the downside is that the appeal and accessibility of these things means the elimination of almost all quiet spaces in our lives. More than any generation in history, we must discipline ourselves to enjoy the blessings of silence and solitude. So there is these blessings that are residing in silence and solitude that we are actually depriving ourselves because we have forgotten these things due to our hyper connectedness and our and the high accessibility of stimulating content brought about by media technology. Why is this important for Christians? Well, we must we must remember first that solitude is a Christian discipline. This is something that we must avail ourselves of as Christians because this aids our spiritual life. This enriches our spiritual life. The discipline of solitude is a Christian discipline first and foremost because our Lord Jesus Himself exemplified its necessity. Remember, for example, in Matthew 14, verse 23, where the Lord Jesus Christ, after the busyness of ministry, we are told, and after he had dismissed the crowds, he went up on the mountain by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone. So Jesus, certainly in his busy life, in his life where he was regularly exposed to the crowd in order to serve them, he regularly availed moments of solitudes in order to have himself uh, be in the presence of his Father, enjoying communion with him in prayer, in meditation, even perhaps. And you see, this has really become more challenging in our day. In Mark 1 verse 35, and rising very, very early in the morning, while it was still dark, he departed and went out to a desolate place, and there he prayed. So he even sought out such a place that he would be alone, so that crowds could not bother him in order that he may devote some time in the presence of his Father. And as I've said, this is becoming more challenging for us. It is very difficult to escape from the crowd when the crowd is in our pockets, when the crowd is in our smartphones. And people can access us far too easily. Jesus had to make himself hard to access at those moments when he needed times of solitude before the presence of his Father. And for many of us, we are very easily accessible because of our devices. So we really need to think about that. You see, and another thing that we must realize is that it is very vital for Christians to regularly engage in unhurried self-reflection, to reflect on how our spiritual state, what's going on in our hearts, what's occupying our thoughts, what's bothering our soul. In many instances, Christians need to arrest certain thoughts that are making them depressed, anxious, in order that they may counter it with the hope that God's promises provide. We find this practice commended in the Psalms. For example, the psalmist is arresting his soul. He is engaging in self-reflection in order that he may have a dialogue not with other people, but a dialogue with his soul. Why are you cast down, O my soul? And why are you in turmoil within me? So he is engaging in self-reflection. And he is preaching to his soul, hope in God, for I shall again praise him, my salvation and my God. But this internal dialogue can only happen when we avail for ourselves moments of solitude. This discipline can only yield its produce in the quiets of the soul, provided by solitary hours in the presence of God. So that is why, as I've said, this is a Christian discipline. And not only that, we most of our spiritual disciplines, uh, especially private spiritual disciplines, uh, are to be engaged in the quiets and solitudes, to use the word of Jesus, the solitude of our closet, the solitude of our private room. Jesus, for example, said, but when you pray, go into your room and shut the door. But for many of us, it is not what's outside the door that is distracting us from our spiritual disciplines, but what is on our phones. So solitude is a Christian discipline. But secondly, solitude is actually, interestingly, a prerequisite for a healthy relationship. So the capacity for solitude is paradoxically also an important condition for better social interaction. You see, our relationship with people, when it arises from a position of loneliness or neediness, because we are incapable of being alone, what happens is that our relationship becomes selfish. We end up using and exploiting people for our own happiness, and uh, that is not right. I'm Let me quote from a non-Christian author, but I think he made a good point. Eric Fromm. I do not commend everything that he says, but this is, I think, on point. He said, concentration is by far more difficult to practice in our culture, in which everything seems to act against the ability to concentrate. The most important step in learning to concentration is to learn to be alone with oneself. And this ability is precisely a condition for the ability to love. If I am attached to another person because I cannot stand on my own feet, he or she may be a lifesaver, but the relationship is not one of love. Paradoxically, the ability to be alone is the condition for the ability to love. So that is an interesting point. If we are only seeking social interaction, perhaps the shallow ones that we get from our social media apps, well, uh, perhaps our reason is because we cannot be alone and we need to use other people in order to contribute to our shallow needs. So that is an important point to make. So that is the first. That is the second effect after the first that we considered last Tuesday. So now let us consider the last one, which is our effects on our capacity for embodied self-reflection, embodied social interaction rather. And this is where we may find another paradox that is inherent in these social media apps. These new media are purported. They are promoted to enrich human connection. After all, they are called social media. It is for socialization. But in the long run, the actual result is the replacement of the deeper embodied kind of social interactions with an inferior substitute, the substitute of shallow virtual correspondence. So what happens is they intrude on our spaces for solitude, as I have said earlier, but the truth is they do not really provide the togetherness, the human interaction that we need as social beings. So uh, that is that compounds the problem of our our uh, mental health, for example. There is also a research on this published by Sherry Turkle in her book Alone Together. And she had the inquiry, and her inquiry is like this. Can man transform the way he communicates without altering at some level what it means to be human? So can we transform the way we communicate with other human beings without changing some fundamental aspects of who we are as human beings? And this is actually a shared Christian concern. In her book, she said, technology is seductive when what it offers meets our human vulnerabilities. And as it turns out, we are very vulnerable indeed. We are lonely but fearful of intimacy. Digital connections and the sociable robot may offer the illusion of companionship without the demands of friendship. Our networked life allows us to hide from each other, even as we are tethered to each other with rather text than talk. So imagine that. So that is the condition that we are in now. Because of these social media apps, we have replaced the actual embodied social interactions that that can that we truly need as social beings, and we replace it with an inferior substitute that cannot truly provide for our social needs. Now, this is again important for our uh, Christian life, because I believe that for Christians it is very important to recover the Christian vision of human life. And the Christian vision of human life celebrates our embodied existence. We are not just souls. We are not virtual in a sense. We are embodied. We have bodies. So there are two things that you can look at that from the perspective of the Bible. You can look at that in terms of the Christian worldview. And in terms of the Christian worldview, you could note that all the pillars of the Christian worldview actually celebrate our bodily existence. What are the pillars of the Christian worldview? Creation, fall, redemption, and restoration. And all of these point to the our embodied nature as human beings. For example, in creation, you would note that the dignity of an embodied humanity is actually traceable to the truth that God has created man in his image as a united duality of body and soul. Man is not only a soul, it is in his embodied existence that he is proclaimed, that he is declared, that he is created as the very image of God. So, God's image in man, while we can say is most excellently manifest in his spiritual component, it is to a degree also displayed in our bodies. Now, we do not mean that God is composed of physical and bodily parts as we are, because the Bible clearly teaches that God is spirit. In John 4, verse 24, for example, we are clearly told that God is spirit, therefore we must worship him in spirit and truth. And a spirit is immaterial. It has no bodily or physical or corporeal properties. But when we say that we image God through our bodies, what we mean is that our bodily functions display an analogy of what is perfect in God. As God's image, we display God's glory to the fullest in our embodied existence. For example, God is spoken of in scriptures as a God of seeing. It doesn't mean that God has an eyeball in the same way that we have in all of the parts of what an eye constitutes. But what what we can do in terms of seeing through our eyes, God can perfectly do, because he is a God of seeing. So in that way we image God through our bodies. The same is true when the Bible speaks of God as having hands. It doesn't mean that God has literal hands, physical hands, but it means that he can execute his purposes in the same way that we can use our hands in order to execute our purposes. So being created in the image of God doesn't mean only our soul. It is our it includes our embodiedness, because we are embodied creatures as God has intended from creation. So the creation uh, places dignity on our embodied existence. Um, and then another another is the fall. When you look at the fall of man, when man sinned, his chief indignity is death. The chief indignity of man is death. And what is death biblically defined? Well, biblically defined, death is not merely the cessation of breath or the cessation of a heartbeat. It is the separation of the soul and body. Ecclesiastes 12 verse 7, on the dust returns to the earth as it was, and the spirit returns to God who gave it. The soul separates from the body. It is the soul in its nakedness that that constitutes death. It is the body without the soul, and the soul without the body, because that is not the intention of God for humanity. We are to be united souls and bodies. And of course, the truth of redemption and restoration points to the same dignity of the body. We have the Lord Jesus, we have the Son of God celebrated during this season of Christmas, taking upon himself the form of frail humanity. So God became man for our eternal redemption, body and soul. Uh, God became man, body, and soul for our redemption, to redeem us from sin by dying on the cross, so that he may glorify us in a state of glorified, embodied existence in the resurrection. In the resurrection, we are going to be embodied, glorified beings. So redemption and restoration points to the dignity of our embodied existence. As let me quote a long quotation from Reed Mercer's Cushart. He said, "The primary noticeable media effects of our age, and perhaps the key to understanding and or the cause of all the other effects, is disembodiment. For the Christian whose identity consists in imitating the incarnated Christ, this represents a grave danger. Our entire religion rests on the fantastical claim of the virtual made real, the idea of an invisible God actually and literally embodying himself in the physical presence of one historically real human being, Jesus Christ. If true, then Christ really is the antibody to the virus of mass disincarnation. This is what both the incarnation and communion are all about, and why the Christian faith may be more crucial for sanity in the digital world than ever before. So that is the Christian worldview. It celebrates the embodied existence of man. And lastly, we can also look at it from the perspective of the Christian communion. In the presentation of the Bible, even in the New Testament, especially in the New Testament, Christian communion can only be expressed to the fullest within embodied interactions. During this pandemic, we had to make use of the virtual means in order to facilitate our fellowship, but those are incomplete. Those cannot truly express Christian communion as the Bible intends. Various forms of media can be utilized with great thankfulness in order to supplement our fellowship, but it can never replace it. And you can find this truth in John, um, in the letter of John, second letter of John, in when he said to his recipients, "Though I have much to write to you, I would rather not use paper and ink." So that is a media technology, paper and ink. But and John was writing, meaning he was making use of the media technology that was available to him in order to supplement the fellowship among believers. But John continues, "Instead, I hope to come to you and talk face to face so that our joy may be complete." So it is in the face to face, embodied communion, that we can truly express Christian fellowship. And we cannot express that completely and fully through media technology, by the mediation of media technology. So that is why, as Christians, we really should think about our social interactions. Are we replacing our uh, our deep and embodied social interaction with fellow believers with the shallow uh, and instant gratification of our social needs using these social media apps? As I've said, my my point and my call has not been abstinence, but one of self-reflection so that we may truly know how these things, this media technology that we are using, that we are embracing, are actually contributing to our values as believers, as Christians. So, my challenge then for us is that we should maintain a healthy balance of solitude and embodied community in the Christian life. And these values are things that must inform our use of digital media. So that ends my series on virtually living.
Thank you very much, Pastor Joseph, for your talk. We will now be moving to our Q&A portion for this evening. But a few reminders first. Please keep your questions short and to the point so that we can have more time for as many questions as possible. Please also avoid asking questions regarding very specific cases that might involve sharing private information. For live questions, you can use for here the people here in Zoom. You can use the raise hand function to be acknowledged by myself, or you can send them through the Zoom chat or privately to our Zoom host, Sister Eliza, or to myself, Brother Joseph. For those joining through FB Live, you may ask questions by sending them in the comment section or in by sending a private message to our RCM FB page. Your questions will be answered will be forwarded to the speaker as time permits. With that, though, we will now be giving time for some questions. I have a question here, Pastor Joseph. Um, how can technology use how can technology use hurt the Church of God?
So I think that is a good question, and uh, definitely technology can help and is helping the church. Just imagine sitting on a service during a Lord's Day and look at just about everything around you, and you would note that we are really blessed by the technology that we are using. Even as simple as the illumination that are coming from the lights, the bulbs that we have, the and then the amplification of sound so that we can better hear the ministry of the words. So technology is a blessing, and that is something that I have uh, made as a qualification before I set on looking at the negative effects, because I think uh, the wrong conclusion to take from this talk is to say that technology is bad. So that is not what we want. However, technology can hurt the church if we are not thinking about what we are losing uh, just because there are conveniences that technology offers. So that is the trade-off principle, as I have said. So, for example, because of the pandemic, most churches needed to avail the virtual way of gathering. So they were using Zoom and other apps like that, and of course that is a blessing that we can afford those means in during times of when providence calls for those things. However, some churches, I think, have made the conclusion that this can be normal. This can be the new normal for the church. So and what happens is, because of the conveniences, they are now becoming blinded to what we are actually losing, which one of it is the the depths of the embodied fellowship and communion that is not available when we are just gathering, so to speak, you through virtual means. So technology can hurt the church in the same way that technology can hurt a an individual Christian if we are embracing a technology for the conveniences without minding the losses that it may take on us.
Thank you for answering the question, Pastor Joseph. We have another question here. Good evening, Pastor. Is it right to say that the accessibility of people through gadgets, which help cultivate secret, intimate relationships, have undermined parent child and marriage relationships, intruding and replacing relationships that God Himself has instituted, disrespecting parental authority and marital unity?
So I think uh, that would be one of its negative effects that uh, young people who are still under the authority of their parents can engage in relationships that are not really supervised, and so they become either disobedient to their parents, or perhaps even if they were not intending to be disobedient, just because these things are available can provide such opportunities of unwise relationships. So I can affirm that without saying that such connectedness is only bad uh, for uh, for romantic relationships to develop as such.
Thank you, Pastor Joseph. We have a forwarded question from FB. Any practical suggestions po, Pastor, kung paano i-balance yung paggamit ng technological advancements in such a way na di napapabayaan yung personal reflections, time, and solitude?
So that would be a personal assessment, because we have different needs, we have different tolerance on these matters, we have different uh, discipline, yung a bit grace of self control. So that would really depend. I'm not sure I can give specifics right now. I can forward. Yeah, when I conducted this, when I first taught this for a Sunday school in our church, the last part actually was about the more practical tips that people can consider in order to moderate or regulate their use of social media. So perhaps I can send that to one of the organizers, and it could be available for requests. The handout, I mean, the notes.
Thank you, Pastor Joseph. Here's the follow-up po to the previous question about cultivating secret relationships through use of gadgets. How can this be avoided daw po?
So for those who are still under the supervision of their parents, especially the younger ones. So I think there are actually uh, 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 devices or systems that can be placed in order to regulate the use of their internet. So I think it is especially crucial for those who are younger ones, because not only secret relationships but secret browsings of the internet have the internet has a lot uh, to offer to those curious young minds that can lead them astray. So we can set up those systems of restriction I'm not sure how to do that practically, but I know that there are such restrictions that can be made. So pwedeng tanungin yung mga mas techie. So for example, limiting access to certain websites that are pornographic, etc. So that is one thing. But for the older ones, I think it would really there would really some necessary independence that we can gradually give to them with a certain degree of trust. So we do not want to police everything that they are doing in the internet and everything that they are talking about. So I don't think that that would be healthy either. So we really have to live within the dynamics of this digital age. So there is wariness, but there is also uh, uh, the acceptance of the situation. I think that would be my answer to that.
Thank you, Pastor Joseph, for the answer. Um, I have another question here po, forwarded to me. Do you have ways to find out how the youth will know if they are addicted to technology? Examples, questionnaire they can answer to help them their stays.
So I don't have a questionnaire for that. With regards to addiction, well, the definition of addiction, I believe, biblically speaking, is losing one's control of self. So what is crucial here is the grace or the virtue of self-control, which according to the Bible is one of the fruits of the Holy Spirit in the life of the believer. So having control of oneself means we can direct ourselves because we are not enslaved to certain cravings that make us lose our hold of ourselves. So when we do not have that, so that is an indication that we are addicted. So for example, we find ourselves looking at our phones and browsing for significant amounts of time, more than what we need or more than what we want. So which means we are not totally in control. We are enslaved to something that is beyond, that has gained power over us. So when we are doing things more than what we want in the sense that what we know to be good for us spiritually, uh, mentally, emotionally, then that means we are addicted to something.
Thank you po. Here, we have another question here. Many people today rely on phone messaging as a means of communication. A consequence is that more people tend to be more comfortable communicating through texts/chats rather than in-person conversations. How do we balance the use of such technology, especially with kids who now rely heavily on messaging apps to stay connected with others during the lockdown?
So I think that is one of the more unfortunate effects of this media technology. That when something is better talked about in person, we choose the convenience of messaging someone, and it actually uh, ruins or injures our ability or skills for socialization. So, for example, there are hard conversations that Christians should have. We have that in the Bible, confronting a brother because of uh, his sin. For example, in Matthew 18, we are told that if your brother sins against you or sin in general, go and tell him his fault. For example, in Matthew 18, but going and telling someone his fault seems to be a too cumbersome activity to do, and many people are anxious in doing that. So instead of going and telling his brother his fault, he would go and text his brother his fault. So I think that it is unfortunate because as Christians, we should develop these social graces. We should not uh, we should not let uh, choose convenience over the the fruits of perhaps hard and difficult actions, such as personal confrontation and conversation with the brethren. So so I think that when we are losing those social graces, those social skills, because of the convenience that these things offer, then we have moved to the more unhealthy side of our use of this media technology.
Thank you po for the answer. I have another question here. In the academe, digital media is seen as a disruption rather than a distraction. What is your comment on it?
I'm actually not sure how the one asking distinguishes between disruption and distraction. So if it can be clarified, I would appreciate it.
We have another question here. Some people may struggle. Wait, nag-message po sa akin yung to elaborate. Disruption accommodates both the good and the unintended outcome or consequences. So, yun po yung disruption daw dun.
So by the disruption, there is the recognition that it is not all good, and so we embrace the good, and we kind of mitigate those who are those things that are not good. So if that is the meaning, then I think I would agree to the statement that we necessarily embrace the good, but we should think about those losses and harmful effects that these things may uh, have upon our lives, our Christian lives.
Thank you po. We'll be asking our final two questions. The one of them is how can one avoid disrespecting and undermining marriages through the use of their gadgets?
Disrespecting and
Undermining marriages through the use of their gadgets.
undermining
Yeah, exactly.
marriages. Uh, I so I think this would be something that that has to do with marital boundaries. I think, if I'm not mistaken, that is how I understand the question. So, for example, a married person may be engaging in an unhealthy amounts of conversation with another individual that is not his or her spouse, not because that person intends to cheat on the partner, but simply because of the easy access that can be brought about by this media technology. So I hope that I got the question right. So I think the uh, the practical advice I would I would tell on people is that if if someone is going to text a married person, is going to engage in a conversation with a married person, keep in mind that perhaps a good exercise is to keep in mind or be aware and reflects on a hypothetical that if this person's spouse is present in the conversation, would that spouse feel violated or disrespected because of the perhaps the prolonged conversation or the content of the conversation. So then if you think that you would be disrespecting or violating that spouse, or that or the spouse would have that feeling, then it would be a call of prudence to moderate that conversation, or or to engage in it in a more responsible manner.
Thank you. Well, we have another question here. And they're asking if there are any favorite authors where you can share regarding observing Christian solitude and reflections. Who can you suggest the authors for that?
Interestingly, I have not found any book about Christian solitude in particular. When just the topic of solitude, but I mentioned earlier the book of Donald Whitney, Spiritual Disciplines, and he has a chapter on that, which I think is the discipline of silence. So there is that, although I do not comment everything that he said, but so that is one. There is a there is a message by Pastor Noel. Richard Baxter has one on solitude. So thank you, Pastor.
Thank you, Pastor Joseph, and for the recommendation, Pastor Noel. One follow-up lang po that was sent to us. Um, is it possible to for one to become a Christian I'm paraphrasing the question a bit. Is it one to is it possible for one to become a Christian, or to use the words that they use, produce Christians virtually? And then their second question is, what are the clear and present dangers in using social media?
Produce Christians virtually. Uh,
Thinking like through sharing the gospel,
uh,
maybe.
So definitely, we certainly can make use of the media technology in order to evangelize. So that is one of the good uses, that good Christian uses of these things as a means of evangelism. It is not entirely dissimilar with the tracts of the older generations. So there is the medium that that can facilitate the communication of the word, and it can be produced in such a way that a mass of people would be able to access it. So it can definitely be used as a means for evangelism. Uh, so uh, so that, what is the second question? Sorry.
Are the clear and present dangers in using social media?
So basically those that I have enumerated, the effects on our capacity for concentration, the effects on our capacity for solitudes, and on our capacity for embodied social interaction. I actually have a fourth one, which because of time I was not able to include, and it is the effects on our capacity for human compassion. So if you are interested, I think I have an episode in my Inescuela podcast that is about that. So you can check it on the Inescuela podcast. It's about the effects of the social media making us more easily angered in our conversations, more easily anxious because of what experts have called the apocalypse fatigue, and things like that's depleting our capacity to empathize deeply, and so that is another.
Thank you, Pastor Joseph, and thank you for answering the questions and for your talk. Really, it's a we know that technology is a blessing, and but there is still some dangers in using it because we live in this sinful world, and I really need God's grace and the wisdom in utilizing it, and that it may not hamper our own disciplines also.